I look back on all the politics, I had when I was a kid. Um, I don't know. It just never made any sense to me, much like it does now. Well, it makes more sense now, but it still doesn't make much sense. I don't know. It just I remember like 9/11, right? Um, I was in like fourth grade when it happened, and everybody was like hyper focused on the terrorist act, the plane crashing into the towers, and how it's the most, the plane, and how it was the most terrible thing that could ever have happened. And how dare these terrorists do that? And then when the towers fell, thousands of people died. It's like, man, America, has to recover from this. These terrorists won't get away from this. Won't get away with this. And it was like, I don't know. I was never obsessed with the act of terrorism itself, but more like the aftermath, right? Like the plane crash was horrible and everything, but to me, what was more horrible was like the loss of people dying, right? Like that to me was much more tragic than the terrorists committing an act of, inhumanity. To me, that kind of flips public morale. It kind of creates this narrative to where instead of helping the people that were affected by the tragedy, we're more interested in punishing the terrorist and you know creating them as a conduit for agendas and shit. Um, and it just back then as a kid, I couldn't fully piece that together as a kid, but that was the feeling I had. And another, nowadays when I'm starting to understand how society does voting, because a lot, so many people, look at voting in this very jaded way. Um, Not like the act of voting itself. Well, if you're MAGA, but I'm talking when it comes to picking a side. I kind of look at the political party system, at least in America, as much like social media. It's like a double-edged sword thing. It creates a competition for each other, and I kind of look at it as both like a good and bad thing. Because on a good thing, you get to convince people of you know positions and get to change minds, et cetera, et cetera. Um, there's the negative side of that to me is people had started to feel like politics shouldn't be based on competition. It should be based on basic human rights and based on what people need. And I feel like when it you know when it comes to politics, a lot of establishments and stuff, I feel like they can't have stuff like that. They can't have a party, advocating for things like human rights. Um, because, then they would start to lose power. They need everything to be based on profit and how much money they can make. But anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent again. I do that a lot. Um, what was I saying before? Oh yeah. So the political parties are like a double-edged sword, right? And because society is so jaded about picking a side, and what I mean by that is people look at the voting at the political party process you know, this person has these values and this charisma that I like, so therefore I'm going to choose that. And then once they choose that, uh, they'll entrench themselves in that position. And so like when and I don't say that as as a means to like block out other thought or whatever. I mean, it is kind of that. The way I'm trying to explain it. um it it basically it means that anytime that somebody comes to try and convince them that their candidate is the wrong choice, I feel like to them that comes across like a like a con move. Like they're just trying to get votes for their side. They feel like it's a very nihilistic perspective. They don't feel like anybody has any principles. They're just gonna go with like the person that sounds correct. And that's like I feel like the perspective that a lot of Americans have is just like it sounds correct and therefore I'm going to vote for them, and anybody that tries to convince me otherwise is just somebody trying to get votes for their side. And to me that's like a very uh it's a very cynical view of like how people vote. Um it completely bleeds out the idea that we can base politics on like ideas and policy. But now it's just about like what side you're on, and who your friends are, and what religion you believe in and shit like that. And I feel like that stuff shouldn't be in politics if you're left or right. It should be based on like how can we help our communities the best. Um and it just seems way too focused on like image, right? It's like way too much on like branding and selling you narratives and selling you fucking bullshit. And now that social media is around, social media is basically like the cable news 2.0 at this point. Before social media, all of our news and information came from, like CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and all that garbage. And then social media got created in a way to like connect all people and cultures together so that we could like actually get to know other people, not just like where we are but like across the country, across the world. And I felt like that was gonna like remove the divisions at the time, and so like we could get like the real story from the real person. And then all of a sudden politicians and companies got their hands all over social media, and now it's just another fucking uh, machine, another status quo American machine. They keep the narrative what they want it to be. Even no matter if it's Democrat or Republican. If they can profit off Democrats, they're gonna pick Democrats. If they profit off Republicans, they're gonna pick Republicans. So like I feel that jadedness of voting in myself a lot too, because like I'm a staunch independent. I hate both parties. I guess my politics align with leftism and stuff, but I'm really not interested in like promoting my party label. I'd rather just consider myself somebody that promotes ideas. And I feel like if the left wants to win or whatever, they need to stop with like, this idea that if we keep reminding people that we're leftists, then we'll get more votes. So, yeah, that's just, I don't know. This is just kind of like a rant. I just been kind of, it came because like there's a bunch of, well, there's like a handful of MAGA people that are looking at what Trump's doing in Iran and going, uh, you said you were anti-war, remember? We don't want to do this. But they can't say that to Trump, so they have to dress it up as like, you know, uh, we're gonna weaken the country. They can't criticize Trump directly because they're pussies. Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, they were both like, yeah, I don't know if this is a good idea. Um, so I don't know. like I said, I'm very scatterbrained. So like all the pieces of what I want to say are there. Somebody smarter than me just put it all together.